Hello everyone, I am here to welcome you to Story Seekers. One night, a college student received a phone call from a friend and then left alone to meet him. After that, he never came back. The next day, the man's family reported the case to the police. However, just a few hours ago, a woman called the police and said she had found something in the woods. Where did the man go that night? Can the police find the real killer? Next, I will tell you about the Stéphane Dieterich case that happened in France.
The story takes place in Belfort, a city in southeastern France. It is a center of wine and grain trade, and one of the largest rock festivals in France, the Recounting Festival, is held every year in Belfort. The protagonist of the story is Stéphane Dieterich, who was 24 years old. He had only 4 people in his family. Besides his parents, he also had an older brother. His father was a senior executive at a local bank, and his mother was a housewife. Stéphane had just graduated from college that year, and he was determined to make a career and achieve his life goals. To celebrate Stéphane's graduation, the whole family decided to take a family trip. However, strangely enough, on the night before they left, something unexpected happened. On July 5, 1994, a woman and a young man reported to the police that Stéphane, a 24-year-old college student, had gone missing since last night. He had left home at 10 p.m. to meet his friend Christophe Blind, who was also 25 years old. Christophe said he had not seen Stéphane since 10:30 p.m. and did not know where he went. Stéphane lived with his family in Belfort and was planning to go on a trip with them the next day. He had spent the day with his family and had dinner with them. He was playing chess with his brother at 8 p.m. During that time, the phone rang at home and Stéphane got up to answer it. After a short conversation, he told his family that a friend was leaving town and wanted to meet him at 10 p.m. Stéphane agreed to the invitation. 2 hours later, it was 10 p.m. and it was drizzling outside. Stéphane was wearing a thin shirt and ready to go out. He looked out the window and saw that the rain was not very heavy, so he decided not to take an umbrella. He told his mother that he would be back in 15 minutes.
After saying goodbye to his family, he left home cheerfully. There was already a car parked outside. Stéphane walked straight to the car. It was his friend Christophe who had come to take him to the meeting. At 10:30 p.m., Christophe dropped off Stéphane at his destination and then drove away alone. Back at the starting point, Belfort's light rain turned into a downpour, and the sky was dark with thunder and lightning. Stéphane's mother lay in bed, tossing and turning, unable to sleep.
By then, Stéphane had been away from home for an hour. He had left in a thin shirt without an umbrella, a wallet, or a key. His mother was worried that he wouldn't be able to open the door when he came back, so she stayed up to let him in. She waited until the next morning, but Stéphane still didn't come home. So she called Christophe, who had picked up Stéphane last night. He said he had dropped off Stéphane at Était Park in central Belfort at 10:30 p.m. The park was 3.5 kilometers from Stéphane's home. There was an open-air party going on at the park that night. Christophe said Stéphane didn't tell him who he was going to meet. He also found it strange that he hadn't come home all night. After hanging up, Christophe drove to Stéphane's house. After a brief discussion, they went to the police station to report Stéphane's disappearance. At the police station, Stéphane's mother and Christophe told the police everything that had happened. Meanwhile, some police officers who had been in court returned to the station. They looked serious and were discussing the discovery of an unidentified young man in the woods this morning. However, earlier in the morning, a woman had called the police anonymously and said she had found a young man with vital signs in the woods. The police rushed to the scene after receiving the report. Later, some officers returned to the station and were overheard by Stéphane's mother. She felt something was wrong and instinctively thought that the man might be her son Stéphane.
She immediately called her husband and asked if Stéphane had come home. When she got a negative answer, she told him to come to the station quickly. Then, accompanied by the police, the couple identified the victim in the woods as their youngest son Stéphane. The time went back a few hours. At 7:40 a.m. that day, the police arrived at the scene according to the address provided by the anonymous woman. The place was 3.5 kilometers from Stéphane's home, and the woods where the crime occurred were on one side of the road. with dense branches and leaves, making it hard to see anything unusual from outside.
The police followed a path into the woods and found a young man curled up on the wet ground, dead. He was later confirmed to be 24-year-old Stéphane. He was wearing a thin shirt and had a branch on his foot. There had been a storm in Belfort from last night to early this morning, and the ground was still wet. Strangely, Stéphane's body was dry. The police initially thought that the woods might not be the first crime scene, and that the victim had been moved there after the rain.
But this view was later rejected. The forensic doctor said that the rain had washed away a lot of traces. Stéphane's body was dry because it had been several hours since he died until the police arrived. Considering the temperature factor, it was possible for his clothes to dry. According to Stéphane's rigidity, the case happened at 5 a.m., a few hours ago. He had been stabbed in the chest.
He had more than a dozen wounds and may have had sex with a man before he died. He was stabbed several times, but his clothes were not damaged, so it was assumed that they were put on later. The suspect may have attacked him by surprise, as there were no obvious signs of resistance on Stéphane's body. He left home at 10 p.m., but he didn't go straight to the park. He went to a bank 1.4 kilometers from his home first. At 10:04, he arrived at the bank and withdrew 500 francs from the ATM. However, neither the money nor the bank card used to withdraw it was found at the scene in the woods.
Stéphane was not a cheerful person, but rather introverted, shy, and liked to be alone and explore new things. After graduating from high school, he entered the Grenoble Alpes University with excellent grades and became a student of its business school. This is a public comprehensive research university with nearly 700 years of history, one of the oldest universities in Europe, and one of the top universities in France. Stéphane was kind, helpful, and liked to write in college. To earn some income to support his studies and life, he would contribute to some newspapers.
He also liked to trade stocks, had his own insights, and sometimes led his classmates to invest together. However, after investigation, there was no evidence that he had any money disputes with anyone. One possibility was that Stéphane had attracted the attention of some criminals when he spent money at the park that night. Stéphane was followed by them after he left the park. When he walked to a deserted road, they took him into their car and committed the crime, then dumped him in a remote woods. The police followed this line of thought and checked one by one the tourists and staff who attended the park party that night. But no one said they had seen Stéphane that night. The police pinned their hopes on the invitation phone call that arrived at Stéphane's home at 8 o'clock that night. Unfortunately, the call was made from a public phone booth. Who was the person who met Stéphane that night became a mystery. Christophe, who accompanied Stéphane's mother to report the case that day, was the last person to see Stéphane. Therefore, he naturally became a suspect in this case. 2 months after the crime, the police found Christophe again and interrogated him. Christophe's testimony was similar to before. He said that after picking up Stéphane at 10 p.m., he took him to a nearby bank. Stéphane withdrew 500 francs from the ATM. Stéphane told Christophe that he was going to the park to join a party and meet a friend there. Christophe said he didn't know who the friend was. At 10:30 p.m., Christophe dropped off Stéphane at the park and then drove home. After a while, Christophe went out for a walk by the river, then went to his girlfriend's house, and finally returned to his own home.
At 7 o'clock the next morning, he got up and saw that his car was covered with mud, so he started washing it. Soon after, he received a phone call from Stéphane's mother. When he learned that Stéphane was missing, he immediately drove to his house, and then went to the police station with Stéphane's mother to report the case. Christophe's words were not accepted by Stéphane's family, who thought their son would not go to the park in the rain without an umbrella. Stéphane had left home in thin clothes and it was windy and rainy outside. He couldn't have stayed for long.
Stéphane's mother told the police that she had seen her son's bank card on the dashboard of Christophe's car on their way to the station. Christophe said that he had found out that Stéphane had left his bank card in his car after dropping him off. He put it on the dashboard to remind himself to give it back to Stéphane the next time he saw him. Christophe was 25 years old and went to the same university as Stéphane. Christophe's family was not well off and could not afford the high tuition fees. His grades also plummeted for some reason. He was lucky to meet Stéphane, a freelance writer who had published many articles. He joined Stéphane in writing and used the income to pay for his tuition.
Over time, they became close friends. Christophe was handsome, humorous, and had many friends. Stéphane, who was introverted, was also influenced by Christophe and participated more in social activities. They often played tennis together and had a great time. Even though Christophe seemed like a charming gentleman to outsiders, who was unlikely to do such things, the police still thought he was suspicious.
They tried to find clues from their relationship. According to Stéphane's family, Stéphane was gay and dressed neatly and cleanly. He cared a lot about his appearance. The police suspected that Stéphane and Christophe might be more than just ordinary friends, but there was no evidence to prove this guess. Some of Stéphane's other friends told the police that they and Stéphane and Christophe planned to start a company together after graduating from college. Christophe, who was steady and reliable, was in charge of managing the company's finances. The police guessed that Christophe, who was not well off, had money disputes with Stéphane. This could explain why they went to the bank together and withdrew 500 francs that night. And why did Stéphane's bank card appear in Christophe's car? They guessed that money was the trigger for Christophe's crime.
To get evidence, the police monitored Christophe and tapped his phone for 24 hours. After a later inspection of Christophe's car, the police found 2 kitchen knives under the driver's seat. The blades were clean and undamaged, which made the police suspect that they were the murder weapons. Christophe said that these 2 knives were tools he had bought for his kitchen. He had put them under the drawer after buying them and planned to take them out when he got home.
He had forgotten to take them out until the police reminded him. He didn't know when he would remember. During this time after the crime, Christophe was constantly asked by the police to assist in the investigation. He was annoyed and lost 20 pounds. He was angry and sad about the police's suspicion.
Christophe insisted that he was innocent. He thought that the police should not treat him as a suspect, but use their time and energy to catch the real killer. On the morning of July 5th, the person who called the police was a woman.
She went to the woods for a walk by herself. Suddenly, she saw a car speeding up and stopping on the side. Then 2 men got out of the car. They seemed to be arguing. One of them kept talking to the other, but the other remained silent. The woman was too far away from the 2 men to hear what they were saying. After a while, she heard a scream from the direction of the 2 men. Then they walked into the depths of the woods. Out of curiosity, she walked quickly toward where the 2 men had disappeared. After a while, she saw 2 figures not far away.
Through the moonlight that shone into the woods, she saw that one of them had a knife on his waist. She realized that something was wrong and stopped subconsciously. She ran into the woods. After a while, there was another scream from the woods. She was very scared and ran back to the camper van. She told her companions at the campsite what she had seen in the woods. They thought she was overthinking it.
She thought that maybe nothing had happened to the 2 men, and they were just walking in the woods. As for the screams, maybe they were scared by some animals in the woods. With her companion's comfort, she calmed down and thought she might have overthought it. At midnight, the rain at the campsite turned into a storm, and the party had to end early. The people who attended the party also left one after another, but she was still uneasy. She specially checked the car that the 2 men had parked outside the woods, but it was gone. She felt something was wrong. After returning to the camper van, she tossed and turned and couldn't sleep. A few hours later, the sky gradually brightened. She went into the depths of the woods again with doubts and saw a shocking scene. A man was lying on the ground not far away, motionless.
She was scared and ran out of the woods, then went to a nearby house with her companions and called the police there. After learning this situation, the police thought that the killer might be someone who attended the party, but after checking, no one had seen Stéphane at the party.
The investigation stalled for a year after the crime. They did not find any evidence that Stéphane's friend Christophe had committed the crime, nor did they find any new suspects. There was a rumor that a man had boasted in a bar that his former boss was the killer that the police had been looking for. The rumor spread quickly in the area. The officers who were investigating Stéphane's case found the man. It turned out that his former boss was not in Belfort on the day of the crime and had died. Based on the man's drunken words, there was no proof that his former boss had anything to do with Stéphane. Since this case had few clues, no fingerprints or DNA, it gradually became a cold case.
19 years later, the cold case in Belfort attracted people's attention again because of media reports. Under public pressure, in July this year, the Belfort police announced that they would reopen the investigation into Stéphane's case. They set up a special team to review the case from that year, but the result was the same as 19 years ago, and there was no new discovery.
Just when people thought that such a killer would never be brought to justice, the world turned around. 2 years after the investigation was reopened, the real killer of the case surrendered himself to the police and confessed to his crime. It was none other than Christophe, Stéphane's friend, who was initially suspected by the police. He was 46 years old and a real estate agent. Christophe told the police that he had become friends with Stéphane in college. Later, they moved out of the dormitory and rented an apartment outside the campus. Their co-living life was fine at first, but then, something unexpected happened to Christophe. Once, under Stéphane's threat, they had sex. This happened from time to time in college.
Christophe said he was not gay and wanted to get rid of this life, but he was powerless. Stéphane often asked about Christophe's mother and threatened him that if Christophe did not obey him, Stéphane would make his mother lose her job. Christophe's parents divorced when he was young, and his family was not well off. His mother remarried, and his stepfather was a drunkard who did nothing and beat his wife and son whenever he was
The only source of income in his family was his hard-working mother, who worked several jobs to earn money. If his mother lost her job, the family would not be able to survive. Christophe said that he had been oppressed by Stéphane at school. If he did not obey him, Stéphane would make him lose something. This made Christophe only obey and follow Stéphane like a shadow. To outsiders, they were close and were good friends like brothers. No one knew that they had another relationship besides themselves. Christophe thought he could end his relationship with Stéphane after graduating from college.
He never dreamed that after the graduation trip, Stéphane suddenly confessed to him and said he would tell their parents about it. He would be with Christophe forever. This scared Christophe terribly. He didn't want to live like this. He wanted to cut off his relationship with Stéphane completely. On the night of the crime, Christophe called Stéphane's home with a public phone and invited him. Then he drove his car with Stéphane to a place.
He took him to a remote woods. When he was off guard, Christophe took out the tool on his waist and committed the crime. As for the 500 francs that Stéphane had withdrawn before, Christophe said he didn't use them. He threw the money into a trash can.
The case was finally solved. Christophe was detained pending trial. 4 years after Christophe surrendered, the case was tried in the Vesoul Circuit Court. Christophe Blind was charged with murder, although the verdict was reached after only 4 days of trial. The court sentenced the defendant Christophe Blind to 20 years in prison and 10 years of driving ban for murder. In addition, after 25 years, it finally came to an end. That's all. Thank you for watching. Subscribe to Story Seekers, hit the bell icon to get all our latest stories, and comment below with your favorite type of story.